All right, guys. It's a time in the world where a whole lot of people could use a whole lot more entertainment. So, for those of you who find it entertaining to watch me answer emails and answer questions, this video is for you. And the first question we've got comes from Teddy Hutcherson, and he has got a yaw twitch on his quadcopter. Let's look at what he's got. And I got to tell you guys, when I first read this, I thought, well, surely this is going to be a gyro issue, right? But hang on. Whoa, Teddy, what the hell? This does not seem like a gyro issue to me. Pardon my cough. Because the gyro twitch is going to be much sort of sharper and faster and smaller than that. Like, it'll just be like a tick, tick, tick. But this is like a wah! It's crazy. So fortunately, some tuning to do. Teddy's got a beautiful place to fly. Got a little wiggle there. A little shudder there when we raise the throttle. Something's going on. Those little shudders there. Oh yeah. Something is this is feeling to me more like a gyro or a motor or ESC issue. So the good news is, don't want you guys to see Teddy's email address. That wouldn't be kind to Teddy. The good news is that Teddy has sent us a black box log. All right, well, he says the yaw incident is shown clearly at the 6-second mark. So let's, I guess, go 6 seconds in. What happens at 6 seconds? I'm so confused because I can just see from the stick inputs that it appears that he is doing this. So I guess I'm so confused. Is this a bad yaw gimbal? So whenever we've got uncommanded motion of the quad, the very first thing I want to do is check to see if the quad is actually being commanded to do the supposedly uncommanded thing. So one way to do that is with Blackbox by looking at the stick overlay in Blackbox. Another way to do it is you can, with Betaflight 4.0 and newer, you can actually put the stick overlay in the on-screen display. And if you see that stick moving when you're not actually moving the stick, you know something is wrong. I'm really confused as to whether he's asking about, like, he's doing the yaw moves on purpose, but he doesn't think there should be as much bounce back. Like, but clearly that's just, the stick is moving. And frankly, the way the stick is moving feels like a human is moving that. It doesn't look like bad hardware where it would instantaneously pop to the side and pop back. So I guess I'm a little confused here. But I think the answer we're going to go back with is, Teddy, are you moving the yaw stick? Because if not, your yaw gimbal is messed up. 6 seconds. Yeah. Does it ever do it again? So now it's just flying. Oof. The tune is something. This is not great. This is ugh. Wow, this tune is rough. Oh, lots of D oscillation. Oh, wow, big shudder. So something's going on here. Like, I don't like the fact that when he spikes the throttle here, we get this big shudder. See that big shudder? If we look at the motors, you can actually see the motors are not maxing out. So this is not a case, if you see a motor max out like that, it might be a case where you have a bad ESC or a damaged motor, but the motors don't max out. So it's just like something about the PIDs of the flight controller is really, wonky. See, is he doing that? Oh. All right. Well, I don't know what just happened there. The video just stopped. I'm going to ask him if he's making those yaw moves on purpose, I guess. What is going on? Oh, God, look at the PIDs. Wow. Oh, yeah, these PIDs are crazy. These PIDs are so wacky. Like the eye gain being so high is not inherently a problem, but high feed forward, really high D gain, really high P gain. It's named Badger 5. The Badger is a 5-inch quad. These are some really weird PIDs for a 5-inch quad. Yeah, no, PIDs are screwy. I can't really see what's going on with the filters. I mean, it can, but I can't I would want to see the filter settings, the sliders and stuff. I'm not 100% sure what's going on here. This feels to me like, I don't know what's going on with the tuning, but it feels to me like maybe there's not enough filtering. Quad is really noisy. Yeah, so that's what we're going to go back with. So here's my answer. Hi, Teddy. Are you moving the yaw stick at all during those jerks? I can see in the black box that the yaw stick is moving. I can't tell if you're asking about some specific aspect of the yaw moves or the yaw move itself. How'd you come up with the PIDs for this quad? The PIDs I see in the log are pretty far out for a 5-inch, and the quad is showing signs of way too high P and D gain. This is a question from Jacob Nowak. He asks, I got video working on my quad. Apparently my VTX pad is broken, so maybe he lifted the pad. And we had another hurdle, no OSD. Right, you can't have OSD without connecting the flight controller to the video transmitter. Is there any way to link the VTX pad to the OSD chip? And here's the answer. Hi, Jacob. If you have lifted the video transmitter pad on your flight controller, one workaround would be to scrape back the solder mask and expose the trace that led to the pad, then solder directly to the trace. This is a difficult and fragile repair. Let me be honest with you guys. If you are so ham-fisted at soldering that you lifted the pad, the chances of you successfully soldering to the teeny tiny little trace are basically zero, but that is a thing that can be done. A second option is to use your multimeter's continuity test function and find the pin on the OSD chip that the pad goes to and solder directly to the pin. This is also really difficult, but it can be done. And a third option is sometimes if you poke around with your multimeter, you can find a resistor or capacitor, a little surface mount resistor or capacitor that has continuity to the pad, and you might be able to solder directly to it. These are 3 options if you lift the VTX pad on your flight controller. Here's a question from Adam Trist, who asks, will the iFlight 12-volt 2-amp BEC work on the DJI Air unit at 1200 milliwatts? The DJI Air unit pulls 10 watts of power at its normal output power, sometimes less, but that's the max it can pull. Presumably, when you put it to 1200 milliwatts, it's going to pull a little bit more, but maybe not as much more as you might think. Because a lot of the power that it's consuming is used for other things than the RF output. So don't assume that because 1200 milliwatts is nearly 2 times as much as 700 milliwatts that the power draw of the Air unit is going to go up. It would be easy to measure it. I just haven't actually freaking done it. Maybe someday I will. But what we've got here is a 12-volt 2-amp BEC, and the wattage of that is volts times amps, or 24 watts. Now the DJI Air unit stock pulls about 10 watts. At 1200 milliwatts, it's going to pull a little bit more, but there's no way it's going to get anywhere close to 24 watts, so you're fine. The only catch here is you got to trust that the iFlight 2-amp BEC is really, really, really rated for 2 amps. A lot of times the amp rating on voltage regulators is, shall we say, ambitious, and under some circumstances it won't work. But I would expect that would probably work just fine, and you'd be good to go. Second question is, when I mount the Air unit to the frame, if the frame is touching the Air unit, will it create a short, or is it protected? No, that's fine. The Air unit can touch the frame. That's no big deal. Brian Varies wants to know about the Taranis X90 Plus 2019 Spectrum Analyzer feature. This is a kind of a cool feature that the new Access radios have, where you can do a spectrum analyzer in the 2.4 gigahertz spectrum. But I feel like it's kind of a novelty because these radios use frequency hopping, so they're hopping all over the spectrum. And if there is some interference somewhere in the spectrum, chances are they're just going to hop away from it. Some packets may get corrupted, but you probably don't even have to think about it most of the time. I guess it would only be if like the whole spectrum was just getting clobbered by interference that it might be interesting. I kind of feel like this feature is more of a novelty than anything else, just because 2.4 gigahertz control is very, very resilient and resistant to most forms of interference. So even in bad situations where there's like a lot of Wi-Fi, you tend not even to notice. It's cool that FreeSky put this here, but I think it's kind of a novelty. This question is from Corey W., who says, I was updating the firmware on my Crossfire receiver. It got stuck at 62%, and then it got interrupted, and now it's not working. Corey, here's the fix for you. TBS Crossfire emergency update. There is an emergency recovery method that you can use. What you need to do is this, assuming you have the nano receiver. Follow these steps, and that is how to get it to fail back to an older firmware, and then you should be, this is always, I have never failed to recover a Crossfire receiver using this method. Here's a question from Matt Jones about black lines versus white lines in the video. And then he also asks if he needs to leave the capacitor off his build or not. In my experience, white lines in your video are caused by external interference from Wi-Fi. Black lines are noise from the motors and ESCs. Regarding the capacitor, well, if you're having video noise, then you should install the capacitor. But for 4S builds, I often leave the capacitor off, and I don't worry about it. Here's a question from Grayson Lewis, who is having a problem with the ESCs don't connect, but there's a flashing light on the flight controller. Yeah. Let's see. I asked for a video of the flashing, so let's see. Let's listen also. Oh, that's just a normal startup sequence. Okay. The ESC goes doot, 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 and then the flight controller goes brrrt, beep, beep. Okay, so that's also normal, but the we didn't get the last two tones from the ESC. So the ESC went doot, 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 and didn't do the doot, doot. That means that the ESC is not seeing the motor signal from the flight controller. So now we got some ESCs out of sync. All right, so here's what we know. Normally when you don't hear those last two tones, it means that the flight controller has not powered up. But in this case, we know the flight controller powered up because it did the full startup tone. So we're having an issue with the motor signal between the flight controller and the ESC. So here's the answer for Grayson. In all three examples, the flight controller completed the full startup sequence. So the issue is not that the flight controller is losing power or that the flight controller is damaged and failing to initialize. The issue is that the motor signal between the flight controller and the ESC is like getting messed up somehow. Sometimes the ESC initializes fine, sometimes it doesn't initialize at all, and sometimes the ESCs initialize out of sequence. So there's an inconsistent time when each ESC first sees a valid motor signal. First thing I would do in this situation is inspect the wires. Like damaged wires could cause this problem. It's possible that it's external interference of some kind, but not very likely. And then I would try, if you're using 8K PID loop, lower it to 4K. And if you're using DShot 600, lower it to 300 or 150. Now that may fix the issue, but like, what's your flight controller? It doesn't say what his flight controller is. It's probable that modern flight controllers should be able to handle DShot 600, but maybe DShot 300 4K is needed if this is like an F3 or something and it's having CPU utilization that's high or something like that. Here is a question from Raul Gas, and the issue is that he's only getting about 20% of power with full throttle on the stick. It's barely enough to lift off. Betaflight registers full stick, and when I test the motors with the quad connected Betaflight and the battery plugged in, I get full power using the master slider. The number one thing that I think would cause this would be a prop on upside down. If you put the prop on upside down, then it will not make very much thrust, and the other three motors will scale themselves back. The quad can only be as powerful as its least powerful motor. Here's a question from Jorge Perez. Jorge was doing something with his SPI receiver provider. He was trying to change it to FlySky, and when he saved it, then he couldn't connect and couldn't get into Betaflight either. It's too bad. So if the issue is that you can't get into Betaflight, I don't know why changing your serial provider would prevent you from getting into Betaflight, but maybe something else got changed by accident. The workaround is to put the board into bootloader mode and reflash the board with full chip erase selected, and that'll reset the board to defaults, and hopefully you have a backup of your configuration to get you back in. Here's Scott Smith, who is having trouble getting Crossfire working with his X9D Plus. He can't get the module to power up, and it's pretty hard to get the module to seat. This probably means the pins are not lining up with the socket. Sometimes the pins on the module don't quite line up, or rather the socket on the module doesn't quite line up with the pins on the radio. They go sideways just a little bit. It's hard to tell that this is happening because you can't see in there. But sometimes if you just like wiggle the pins slightly sideways or just kind of wiggle the module just a little bit, you can feel the pins seat and the module will power up. And that's going to do it for today's video. Hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you tomorrow.